Hi, listeners. Our guest today is Jon Samson. He holds a master's degree in music therapy from New York University and a Bachelor of Arts in music composition from SUNY Purchase. He was born and raised in Johannesburg, South Africa, and he offers a combination that is unique around music therapy, education, and studio recording to address the needs of a whole person. And you know what? He's just a cool guy. He did one of the funniest songs that we will talk about on the show about narcissistic personality disorder. It was hilarious. So please join me in welcoming Jon Samson to Mental Health News Radio.
I'm not the house of cards that falls down easily. I'm strong enough to handle what you throw at me.
Welcome to Mental Health News Radio. I'm your host, Kristin Sunanta Walker. Just what are we going to discuss? The intimacy that is mental health. Let's continue to make it as comfortable as discussing brain health or heart health. This show has been on the air for several years and we have amazing co-hosts. And then we created a network of podcasters on mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com, a place where every possible facet of mental well-being can be talked about openly. My show? After several hundred interviews, the format is this: intimate, deep, funny, touching, sometimes uncomfortable, but always vulnerable conversations with interesting people. The goal is to have you, our listening family, many of you who have become my good friends, feel as though you are listening in on private conversations. Thank you for tuning in and becoming part of this amazing journey with me and now with our network of podcasters. Just knowing this podcast might be helping any of you realize you are not alone on this journey called being a human being makes doing this podcast worth every second.
After all, we promised we'd be cordial.
Jon, thank you so much for coming on Mental Health News Radio.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So you're a music therapist, a Grammy winner, a Grammy-winning music therapist. I'm going to get into what that journey was like for you, but what made you get into doing music therapy?
Music therapy, I've been practicing for 15 years. And I would have to say what led me to music therapy, aside from just a passion for psychology and music, is having a bit of a healing crisis myself. Even back in high school. In fact, I can remember just being a little kid and having psychosomatic symptoms, even though I wouldn't have called it that, but just burning in my throat from anxiety and, just sort of inexplicable symptoms that Western medicine couldn't necessarily diagnose or treat because it was just sort of more in the energy realm. Mm-hmm. And so, it would really, I would say my own journey of personal development and healing is what led me to music therapy.
Okay. Now I know you have the indie pop album, children's album, Ageless, Songs for the Child Archetype is what you won a Grammy for, correct?
I think so. I hope so. A lot's changed in the world, but yes, I won that in January. What an honor.
Yeah, I can only imagine. But before we get into that, talk to me about Child Archetype. And what
Absolutely. Okay, so they call it the inner child, the child within. It's really it's become a pop psychology term, but the idea of archetypes in general, really goes back into mythologies and lore. But there's certain archetypes that some of us have, some of us don't. But the child archetype is one that we absolutely all have. It's the first archetype that becomes animated when we're born into this world, and so we're both dependent and also, we have this innate sense of trust and faith in this universe and just see things from a perspective of everything being new and everything being safe. Hopefully, that's if we're not born into traumatic situations. Right. And so, this is my fourth children's album. The other three they all had the phrase kids album in the title, but this one is a little different. Ageless, Songs for the Child Archetype. I really wanted to make an album that, while technically is considered in the genre of children's music, it really is for the child within everybody of all ages. And the reason I think that's so important is because that child archetype gets squashed
Yes.
by the education system and by just having a job. And, there's just, it's very difficult to find that balance between being a responsible adult and also maintaining that childlike, playful, hopeful part of you. And so that this album is my contribution to that maintenance of really knowing what's going on in the world. It's a pretty tough album. I'm tackling a lot of themes like anxiety and the predicaments we face, but hopefully coming across in a creative, childlike, hopeful way.
Yeah, gosh, do we need that right now? It's May 4th of 2020. So we are, if you're in the United States, you are in the midst of thinking about lessening some of the social isolation, or anyway, some states or counties and so on are thinking about lessening some of the restrictions and others are not. So how have you been faring through this time?
I have to say, I'm very fortunate that I've been able to move my private practice into Zoom.
Good.
And so, so myself personally, it's certainly in no position to complain. Most artists and producers and therapists would probably agree. This is not the virus notwithstanding, it's not a phenomenon to have a lot of isolation because a lot of the work really is behind closed doors. So, and so that's just fortunate because I'm really in a position where I can help my clients and people that are looking for extra support at this time.
Have you seen an uptick in people needing you right now?
I have, actually. There are certain clients that did have to recede because of financial stress, and then others that do have resources have been very proactive about seeking extra support, creative support, mental health support.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to talk to, obviously, being the mental health network, we, talking to the different therapists and life coaches and advocates, but certainly the people that are providing counseling of some sort and moving their practices to be online. There was a little bit of maybe the first week of March, or maybe the second week of March, where things really got serious and okay, now we have to, their orders to stay home. And they saw a lot of clients that first week not be able to come in, and they were thinking, oh, okay, I'm going to be hit financially and I'm not going to be able to blah, blah, blah. And then those of them that switched to online are like, I'm busier than I have ever, took about a week. And then it was nonstop, just, appointment after appointment, which is a huge shift because if you're not used to doing that, that kind of therapy where you're just staring at a computer all day, that is quite, or, a webcam all day, that's quite the shift.
Yeah. And, we've seen these articles coming out about Zoom fatigue, and that's really a real thing. I've really noticed that. So I don't do more than 6 appointments in a day. That's just for my own, self-preservation. And I really want to be able to give the best to my clients. And I'm not trying to run a marathon. I'm not trying to run a sprint here. It's a marathon. And so, I'm not trying to cram in as many clients in a day as possible. It's not the kind of job where you can just sort of overwork and make it work short term. You got to be really present and clear. And so I found that 6 is definitely my limit.
Good. I'm glad that you're, that about yourself, because I've had to do that too. I looked at my calendar today, and Regina, my incredible assistant, she knows. I looked at my calendar today and I had 6 things on there, and that's just 6 Zoom things, all interviews. That's not including all the other stuff I've got to do. And I was like, okay. And she called me and said, okay, it's just today. For whatever reason, everybody had to be today. I promise the rest of the week isn't going to be like that, because she knows, I can't, for what we do, we're both going into very deep work, whether it's an interview or you're doing your therapeutic practice with people. I mean, you're right. You have to be so present for that to give your client what they need. And it takes a lot of energy, emotional energy from you in order to have that kind of presence.
It sure does. That's truth. So it really, because what it means is it makes, I think up until this point, it hasn't been totally clear how much of a luxury versus a necessity self-care is.
Yes.
And I think that certainly in the therapeutic world, but really for everybody, especially in regards to mental health, it's not just this thing that like you should do or could do. It's required. And I think that, and especially if you're working with children, but everybody's got some level of intuition and empathy. They're empathic, and so they'll know if they're coming to you for endurance and clarity and support and energy, and you're not taking care of yourself. They'll know that on some level, if not consciously.
Oh, absolutely. I don't know how you guys do it. I say it all the time. I started my original show just to say thank you to people who choose to be a therapist. I couldn't do it. I don't have what it takes to do that. I think it's just amazing to me, to the reserves that you have to have. I would show up disheveled and not paying attention. And and I know some therapists do, but.
Well, sure. I mean, in any profession, you're going to have, here's something interesting to think about. So we talked briefly about the child archetype. We think about the healer archetype. What I find interesting is that not all doctors are healers. And I mean absolutely no disrespect.
Right.
But, just the way that the enterprise, the business of medicine has developed, you can go to somebody who's a doctor who is just a natural born healer. They just have something about them, a certain quality where you actually feel better just going to the appointment.
Yes.
And then you can go to a doctor who's really got more of an entrepreneur archetype. I'm not calling them evil or out of integrity. Yeah. I just think it's worth, making that discernment.
Right, exactly. Or a narcissist, but it doesn't have to mean that's. It doesn't have to mean that you go there.
Do you know my song? Everyone's a narcissist but me.
No. Oh my gosh. Okay, wait a minute.
It's on YouTube.
I'm right, listeners. If you hear paper, it's because I'm not wanting to clickety clack in your ears, so you have to hear wrestling paper. Yeah. Everyone.
No problem.
How did I not know this? Oh my gosh, it's for my network. That's such a great song. We actually have a page. Oh gosh, I should know what it is. I have to actually look up. We've got so much stuff going on. I actually have to look up on my own website. Now you'll hear clicking, listeners. But I created narcissisticabusehhealingnetwork.com because we have so many podcasts just devoted to that particular topic. That's all they talk about. So I created it and pushed it all into one feed so someone can just listen to all those shows. So tell me what inspired you to do that song?
Well, firstly, it's kind of new age comedy, right? So I came up with the idea like roughly a decade ago, and it was just a joke song between myself and a friend, and I ended up producing it for my own therapy. It's the funny thing is it's one of my most popular songs, and it's not for sale. It's just on YouTube. And I just really enjoyed making a video for it and, just really making light of it, because the truth is there's actually aspects of narcissism that are required at certain stages of our lives in order for self-preservation. Though, the word narcissism it's kind of been distorted a little bit. I think we can agree the real make or break is, are we dealing with somebody that feels threatened by another person's empowerment? And are they, consciously or unconsciously gutting other people just to keep themselves up? So that to me is really defines a narcissist. It's very different than just simply being, self-focused. And, a lot of people are afraid to really step into self-love because they don't want to be perceived as a narcissist, and I think that that's something to really look at. People are afraid of really being empowered because they don't want to be construed as a narcissist.
Oh yeah, I've been through that whole journey too. Now I'm like, no, I'm going to be empowered, and that's the end of that. So,
yeah.
But yeah, that journey of, I always tell people, if you question whether you are one, you're probably not.
That's right. I have so many clients that say, I think I'm a bad person. And I was like, you know what? A bad person is never going to take the time to reflect on the quality of who they are.
Of their personhood. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, did you grow up around music? I mean, it takes a lot for someone to decide to be a therapist, but then to add something like this piece to it, it definitely pushes you out into more of a niche. So what got you going, in that particular direction?
Yeah, well, I'm an artist first. So I grew up in South Africa in Johannesburg, and I was a singer first. And my parents gave me an option when I was about 7. They said, do you want voice lessons or do you want piano lessons? And I opted for piano because I felt like I was going to sing no matter what, but I really needed a teacher for piano, that I'd figure out any techniques or whatnot for, vocals as I went along. And so, I've been writing songs since I was a kid, and we immigrated to the States in 1994. And, I got the lead in a couple plays and, got into some bands in high school. But the seed was really planted when I went to SUNY Purchase in Westchester for my undergrad in studio composition. And so there, to really answer that first question about what got me into music therapy, I had a professor who's a dear friend to this day. His name is Joel Thome. And he himself is a Grammy-winning producer of Frank Zappa, Steve Vai. And he had a stroke, and he was told that he would never be able to walk or teach again. He was basically paralyzed. And in tandem with Oliver Sacks, the woman that became my mentor, my music therapy mentor, Benedicta Skyby, treated him with music therapy. And as a result of that work, he regained mobilization and taught at SUNY Purchase for many, many, many years after that, and, was able to walk around, albeit slowly. But that was just such a powerful example of how sometimes a Western medical prognosis does not necessarily hold all the potentiality of what's possible. That was wordy, but anyway, it was very inspiring. And so, there's different breeds of music therapists. Music therapy came from behavioral psychology. I'm not really in that field. I think everything has its place, but, I'm way more humanistic, transpersonal, with some analytic tendencies. Benedicta Skyby, who passed away a couple of years ago, devastating. That was a trauma for me. She was my mentor from 2003 until 2018. And so she was a very well-known analytic music therapist. So that's when you can really use the music to help uncover insights in the client and help them become more aware of what's really going on inside them.
For someone who, has thought about this, but they don't know exactly which route to take, or someone thinking, well, maybe that would help me, but they kind of want to know, what does a session look like? Can you and I know it's different for different people, but just how it's different from, you sit down in a chair and you talk for an hour.
Right. So, I do have some clients that do sit down in the chair and talk for an hour. And then in some cases, time will go by and then they'll feel like they want to sing a song. So, I do life coaching and just more general talk therapy. But, my passion is obviously doing, that hybrid of music and therapy. So, first of all, the thing to keep in mind here is we need to dissolve that barrier between clinical and not, because the truth is, I think everybody needs some kind of therapeutic support, especially now. And one of the problems I think we face as a society is that we wait for a crisis in order to really do something that we all knew we should have done a long time ago. And so, one of the first powerful lessons I got at NYU music therapy was the opposite of depression is, how would you answer that, Christine?
The opposite of oh man, and I should be able to answer that. But I go to so many places. Okay, the opposite of depression is joy, happiness.
Right. Well, that is absolutely the most common answer. And of course, there's validity to that. But what they teach in creative art therapy school is the opposite of depression is expression.
Ah,
And
okay.
so, you know, so that to me is the primary goal of any music therapy session and really any therapy session, but particularly through music and the creative arts, is giving a person the opportunity to really express what's going on, you know, and there's only so far you can go with verbal communication when it comes to something like anger, where, you know, people will slam a door really hard once and then the house will shake. And that's how they express anger, as opposed to banging on drums for 5 or 10 minutes, you know, just being very physical. There's an element of bioenergetics in this where you're really, you're playing, you know, and look at that word playing, you know, it's not just, you think of playing as, you know, kids playing with blocks, but really playing it out. Drama therapy, art therapy, music therapy, you're acting it out consciously instead of projecting it unconsciously onto all the people in your life. Right. Or people that aren't even in your life. Think about all the fender benders and the arguments that people get into just randomly because they've got things that are just right beneath the surface.
Yeah.
And they don't know themselves enough to realize, like, they're just walking around so easily triggered. So, you know, when it comes to my work, what does a music therapy session look like? It depends on your age, if I'm working with a child or an adult. But, you know, it's always going to have that basic therapeutic foundation of establishing trust and safety. So that's pretty stock, but that's necessary. How can you build anything if you don't have that?
Right.
And so in my work, we do a ton of improvisation. And so that could either look like playing instruments together, or my favorite is making these improvised songs where children just go into a stream of consciousness and they'll be standing in front of a green screen. And they're wearing headphones, and they'll just tell me how fast they want to go, and we'll just program a beat. It's a recording studio, and they'll just start singing, and I'll start playing with them as they're just streaming. And sometimes it's abstract, and sometimes it's literal, but it's so powerful. And I've recorded thousands of these songs. I have an archive that spans 15 years. It's over 10 terabytes of all these different archetypal themes of children singing from their own unique perspectives, but very much about universal patterns that really happen with everyone, right? Which is something I think is really interesting, because a lot of people feel so alone when they're stuck in their anxiety or depression or their loneliness, and they really feel like it's the outside world and then it's them. And I've seen such healing happen when I've taught some of, you know, in therapeutic programs, and shown, with permission, of course, some of these songs, and how uplifted and validated the listeners feel by really hearing kids singing about their pain, and just really validating that, you know, we're all going through something, and giving it a voice and not keeping it inside.
How about working with a kid? And I'm thinking of me when I was a kid, because I did have a ton of trauma. And my father was what is that called? A musical prodigy. He could play literally every instrument. But
I think the technical term for that is badass.
Badass, gotcha. Yeah, but he was also very much an abusive person, and he was abused as a child as well. But I was not, because he was always playing the piano, and I loved it, because when he was playing his music, he was leaving me alone. So it was, so there's all this stuff between me and music, and that, you know, and then he would try to teach me and then make fun of me, you know, the worst thing that you can do. It was really,
it really is.
Yeah, it was awful. So
That's traumatic.
I stopped I used to draw like crazy, and I'm not turning this into me. I swear this has a point, but and listeners that are therapists are going, yes, she is. But anyway,
well, why not? Why not? You know, it's your show. You know, I bring in some of my own personal stories to help the clients sometimes, so that they know I'm a human. So there you go.
Exactly. Well, I used to draw all the time, and I was really, really good at it. And then I told what my father was doing, and everything related to that kind of stuff stopped. And I'm slowly, years later, I'm 50. This is when I was 12. So I'm bringing those things back. And I've been in a lot of therapy, but my question is this: you have a kid like me that comes in and they are embarrassed to sing or to do anything, and they don't want to go to where you're free like that because it isn't safe in their world. It is safe, of course, in your world with you in that moment, but it's also, in some ways, when I look back on it now, it wasn't safe even then to do that, because, oh my God, then I'm going to be infected with this freedom. And how am I going to live and continue to live in this environment when I now know how great it is to be free? You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So how would you work with a kid that you can tell they just, they're really stuck out of safety and also out of, fear and embarrassment and whatever?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think the first thing I do is really let them know that it's okay to be that way. It's okay to be afraid. It's okay to not feel comfortable. They don't have to do anything. Just being here is enough. When you walk into my studio, it really looks like a Willy Wonka factory, but instead of chocolate, it's music. And so, even the kids, I'll get emails from parents ahead of time saying, they're a little shy or whatnot. And they walk in here, and between the instruments, and I do have a 9-pound Maltese puppy that also really helps. That helps break the ice.
That would be the way that you'd be able to get me, is through the dog. So, okay, got it.
Yeah.
But keep going.
And also to bring back that child archetype, I don't present like a normal adult, if I can say that. I really don't. I have such a strong eternal child in me. And so when they meet me, they don't quite get this feeling that they're not meeting a doctor with a white coat. They're not meeting a business person. They're meeting somebody that looks like they just almost fell out of bed in high school, even though I'll be 40 this year, some kids honestly think I'm 20. Right. And so, but I'm not presenting as an authority figure that they need to impress or perform for. I present in a very humanistic way and very, I'm goofy, I'm silly, I find mirroring, so if the kid hides all of a sudden, I'll get on the floor and I'll hide. And then they're like, what? A pattern interrupt, so there's very little, I'm just so into being silly anyhow. And so, there's just this sort of natural, without the expectations, there's no expectations. And so I really have to say, in the 15 years, I've had kids come in feeling a little uncomfortable, but, I've never seen them leave uncomfortable. And I wouldn't even necessarily attribute that to me. I just think there's something so powerful, as a personal, me personally, there's just something so powerful about being in an environment where you just fundamentally know there's no pressure here. I really can just be where I'm at. And so sometimes I'll sing for a client, I'll make myself vulnerable. I'll show them that I'm also in this, and it's not just a one-sided thing. It's mutuality.
I can see why so many of my friends have become actors and musicians and singers, because, I don't have a friend that I literally don't think I have one friend in my life that hasn't suffered some kind of abuse in early childhood. But that was such, they could go escape there in whatever character or song or, that they could get their hands on. Yeah. Yeah.
One of the wisest things one of my clients said to me a long time ago, she was pregnant with her second child. And she said with this surrender, she knows no matter how hard she tries, she's going to mess up her kids a little bit. And I found that to be quite refreshing, because, it's one thing where so many people like you really have been in acute traumatic situations, where you've been in overtly abusive situations. Right. And then, in keeping with just general understanding of mental health, we've got to understand that there's no such thing as a perfect parent, and that there's all sorts of traumas that are invisible. I had a kid, a 4-year-old student, who, and sometimes I say student instead of client because it just doesn't sound as clinical.
Right.
And they're learning from me. So I'm a teacher. And by the way, that's another point, is that I try to encourage the parents to not introduce me as a therapist, but, you know, really as a play buddy or a teacher. But then there's also stigmas against the teacher. So it depends. But I am interrupting myself. So the point is that there's this 4-year-old kid. He was telling me a story about how his dad was, you know, at work all day, and then he came home and he really wanted his dad to read him a story. And this is a loving dad, a devoted dad. And the dad was so utterly burnt out that he had to say no. And the kid interpreted that as abandonment. Mm. And so I think it's really worth noting that sometimes, no matter how hard you try, your kids are going to have these core issues that come up: abandonment, betrayal, feeling loved, feeling important, feeling heard. These are all things that every human goes through on some level. And so while there is so much trauma out there, and we're still in the thick of it, you know, I mean, one of the catchphrases of what's going on now with COVID that I really agree with is, we may be all in the same storm, but we're not in the same boat.
Yes, I love
right.
that.
And
way.
So everybody's got their, we've all got our own experiences, and sometimes we're perceiving trauma when you could say objectively there is none, but it's there. You know, ultimately, if you feel traumatized, there's trauma, and then it needs to be worked through.
Yeah, I was thinking that.
I hope that makes some kind of sense.
Absolutely, It did. Absolutely did. I was thinking this morning, because every morning I get to go out and be with a horse and a donkey and my dogs, and I'm mucking out stalls and, you know, cleaning a pasture and feeding them, and then I'm standing with them. And, you know, I created my life to be like that. It certainly has not always been with that kind of a start to the day, which somebody could hear this and go, who would want that start to the day? But anyway, that was a dream for me to have this start to the day. But as I'm doing it, I'm realizing how many conversations I'm having with people in my head that aren't real conversations, and I'm getting very anxious and agitated. And I have been able to stop doing that a few years ago through a lot of therapy and different kinds of therapy. But during COVID, we all are reverting back a bit, I've noticed, to, you know, some of our trauma response behavior, because we are collectively in trauma. And it's a little bit jarring to go, wait a minute, I thought I was past this. Why is this happening? And having to go, okay, give yourself a break. Look at what's going on in the world. You know? I wondered what you thought about that.
Yeah, well, two things come to mind. So one, healing happens in spirals. So it's very common, even without COVID, for people to be repeating certain lessons and going through certain challenges on different levels, right? So, you know, in a way, you're going to be healing something for the rest of your life. So, of course, it's possible to really work through something and be done, but more realistically, it's just something that we manage over time. And it's specifically to COVID, absolutely everything that has been a challenge before COVID has now been amplified and intensified. If you're having interpersonal relationship issues with your family and your friends, that's all going to be highlighted and coming to the surface much quicker right now. And so it's very important to come back to the basics. Something I try to remind people is that the more you think, the less you breathe.
So true. I actually did a meditation with someone I do meditation coaching with, and she kept saying, I need you to breathe. I'm telling you to breathe. Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. So it's been quite interesting to also be at another level of self-care and empowerment and so on, to say, instead of chastising yourself further for what you feel like you're not coping well with, going, it's okay, you know what, you're human, you know, the voice in your head of kindness, it's great. That's what therapy is great for. I felt like this too, and I wanted to ask you this. I felt like all of us that have been through trauma, and kind of like you said, with the work that you do, isolation for you is not a big deal. It isn't for me either. I prefer it. But I mean, I do love to go out and be around people, but I also need a break. So,
Yeah.
but I feel like a lot of us, you know, in people in mental health are now like, oh, now you're taking mental health seriously. Good. This is wonderful. I'm sorry that it took COVID to make that happen. And this will be happening over the long term. But those of us that have been introspective and gone to therapy and so on are like, okay, we know what's up and we understand why you're having so many issues. Welcome in.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said before, it takes a crisis in order to really get back to, okay, what are the real priorities here? And, you know, if there was one thing I really wanted to encourage people to consider who aren't considering it, it's really why we're here. And I believe it's to heal. And I don't think that problems are something that we need to just make go away so that we can then live a perfect, happy life, but really to embrace our problems and our challenges that are unique to us and co-create with them, you know, and realize this isn't because you're just slacking off, you know. I mean, it's okay to hold ourselves accountable. You know, if you know you need to go for a walk around the block or do whatever you need to do to feel more balanced, you know, then that intuition is going to nag you. It is going to, you know, give you a hard time until you do at least the basic things. You know, so many people are dehydrated, you know, just because they don't take the time to drink water, they forget. And so once you're, you know, look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, so when people are so in their heads about everything, they're not taking care of their basic survival needs. And so from that place, taking on anything else becomes moot. And so I say this with kindness, of course, you know, but really the more you think, the less you feel and the less you breathe. And so let's bring the energy down. You know, what is the most rudimentary basic thing? Because you're not going to be able to think your way out of this predicament. You know, this is really going to be make a list. What are the absolute basics that I need to get through today? Is it making sure you eat an apple or a sweet potato, drinking water? For me, it would be singing some songs, writing something, you know, moving my body, you know, but just for you, just to, you know, how do you have to grease your engine every day, oil your engine, and just start there. And what happens is everything compounds and people have to really, they want to figure out everything. And, you know, what I find comforting is there's only so much that's within the scope of our actual control. And I really like to kind of, you know, set a boundary and say, like, I'm going to really focus on the things that I know are actionable and I do have some kind of objective control over, as opposed to the things that really aren't on my side of the street. Not that you can't have compassion for everybody else going through what they're going through, but really realizing, and just going back to that idea of narcissism, is that, you know, having the wisdom to know that you're going to have the most to offer your family and your friends and your work when you really have put yourself first in healthy ways. And then you're really going to have something to give.
Absolutely. I've had to tell a few places that really, I think it's more that they're chatting online, this sort of community that I'm involved in. I think it's more that they're doing it because of COVID than they have before. But I literally spent a weekend answering these chat messages, and I was like, this is not how I want to spend my time. Not putting down that they're doing that because they're having fun, but it was so too much. It was just too much. I was like, listen, I have a busy week. I'm doing these when we're talking about self-care, like, I'm not going to be able to give what I need to give for these interviews and hold space and do all of that and take care of my animals and take care of someone that I'm taking care of physically. I can't do all that and have this open channel to all this chatter.
Right. Absolutely.
So,
you know, that just shows you how people's needs are different. You have a donkey and a horse. That's lovely. I love that, you know, but everyone's needs are calibrated differently, and it's important to not get stuck in what everyone else thinks is the right thing for them, and I'm not doing it, therefore there's something wrong with me. So that's the opposite of mental health.
Yes.
Right? It's really attuning to your own needs and, just striking that balance for you between how you can connect with other people and knowing when, some people have the hermit archetype, which means in part, you need to withdraw from the world in order to recharge and really come back to a place of health and balance for you. You need complete solitude. There's some people that just don't have that archetypal constitution, and they don't do well without, like the chatter and just really being in that network. And some people have both, right? So it's a dichotomy. You can be a networker and a hermit.
That would be me. But I'm loving the
There you
hermit
go.
a lot more these days.
That's great. Yeah, well, actually, that's something that's maybe a little bit difficult to talk about, but, all of the positives or the opportunities that do come with this, and that a lot of people have no tolerance for just being with themselves, really taking the time to reflect. And so they're being kind of forced into this version of meditation that they otherwise would not have done.
I know. That's what I look at. I'm so glad you came around. We talked about it a little bit, but I'm glad you went deeper into that, because that's the thing that I'm noticing. I am so okay with the dark night of the soul stuff. Is it comfortable?
Mm-hmm.
Hell no. That's why it's called the dark night of the soul. But I've been through it so many times, as you said, the spiral, that it's like it comes and I know I'm going to get through it. I do my thing, and I've been in therapy, and I know what creatively comes out from those things. And people that just avoid that like a plague, and this is the plague that's making them have to have, like they can't not have it, and they are wigging out.
That's right. That's a clinical term too, wigging out. That's why I kick off my album with my song Predicament, which I call it out directly. We all go through a dark night. And it's inevitable. I mean, I've also been learning from Carolyn Mace for a very long time, had the privilege of producing some music for her Sounds True programs. But the dark night is definitely something that I've learned to embrace, and to just realize that we're going to have a healing crisis more than once in our lives.
Right.
And so to realize that this is not a problem that you want to just take a magic pill, inject some Clorox and then make it go away,
Exactly.
Because I just want to point something out about that, with all that upcry of, Donald Trump said we should inject Clorox. I have to say, not that I'm a fan, but, really, it wasn't that he was being literal and saying, okay, everybody, let's inject some disinfectant. But he was saying, can't we just find a magic bullet? That's all he really said.
Right.
And that's really, we've been conditioned to approach things in that way, where if you've got a problem, there's going to be a solution and then it's over with. And that is just not realistic. And I think people are realizing more and more that that's the thing with mental health. This is something that you're going to have to manage for the rest of your life, and that's okay. And then you build a lifestyle around healing and growth. And I think that's where the shock is right now. And I also want to try to be considerate here, because, for many people in this country, personal growth and development is a luxury. We got to recognize that it's so stratified that people really are in such a survival crisis. It's one thing, I have my job intact, my work is intact, and obviously if my clients can afford to pay me, then they're in a different bracket as well. We're not really talking about all the people that don't even have the choice and the options. So I just wanted to be clear, I really am addressing the people that really do have the resources and the opportunity to do this sort of work, because the truth is there's so many that don't. And those are the ones that have my deepest compassion, because, there are choices being made by powers that outrank them around what they have access to, what sort of resources, and so something I'm very passionate about is transforming the blueprint of the education system. And that's how I actually ran my Grammy campaign on that, and like, what would it be like if mental health was really integrated into education and not juxtaposed to it?
Oh my
because
gosh.
I'm seeing
Yeah.
so many students of all ages dealing with anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation as a result of standardized tests and these curriculums that put so much strain and pressure on them, and they're barely coping if they're coping. And
Absolutely.
my absolute fantasy would be to see creative arts therapy in mainstream schools. So we're not just talking about, oh, so and so has a diagnosis of this, let's put creative arts therapy on the IEP cutting edge, but recognizing that every single human being, especially children, really need to be able to express themselves and become conscious of who they are as they're developing, to make personal development part of education, not juxtaposed to it.
Right, exactly. Well, I'm glad that there have been the mental health classrooms, because that's where I would go with a therapy dog and work with
Mm-hmm.
kids. I'm glad that that's there because it was a step in the right direction. But the next step in the right direction is that you don't have to have a separate classroom. There's definitely a school counselor and all that. It's part of every classroom.
Exactly.
So I'm right there. I'm right there with you. Oh, lots to talk about. Last thing I wanted to ask you, and I know we're running short on time, but I just remembered that you did in fact win a Grammy. What the heck was that experience like? It must have been amazing.
Actually, you're going to love this because this is so in keeping with everything else that we've talked about so far. When I won the Grammy, I was so blown out afterwards because of all the sounds and the lights and all of that. There are two different ceremonies that day. There's the first one is the children's music genre and all the other genres that aren't your sort of, top 40, so basically
Right.
it's your more everyday artists, and then you've got your celebrity artists. And by the time that second event rolled around, and I've got Ariana Grande on the stage strutting her stuff, I left, went to Macy's, got a sweatshirt because I was wearing a really blingy jacket, and then I went and got a massage because I couldn't keep up with that. It was too much for me,
Yeah.
So of course, what an honor and what a blessing to be able to share my work with the world and get that sort of acknowledgement. But I'm not really a party animal, and so
Right.
for me, I think we know there are a lot of highly sensitive people. I'm one of them. It
Oh
sounds like
yeah.
you are as well.
Oh yeah.
And so I wasn't even like before when I was nominated. I was like, oh man, I'm gonna have to get on a plane and go to
Oh my
LA
God,
and
you
go
sound
to
like
event
me.
to event. You know,
I'm the
I'm
same
like,
way.
can't I just? Yeah, it's
I
just because
just
there are
get the
people and
certificate in the mail and thank you very
right,
much.
right. And so that's just an irony because there's so many people that would sell
Kill
their
to be
souls
there.
to be able
Yeah.
to go to the Grammy. And for me, I mean, again, I am so grateful, and just the Recording Academy was so good to me. And, really, especially since, I have probably the lowest social media following or fan base of any Grammy nominee potentially. I mean, I'm like the opposite of Trump. Like, no one has less followers than I do. Like no one knows who I am. And so it just shows you the integrity of the Recording Academy, that the voting members really took into account, they're not the hype, but the art itself. And that was so delightful to be able to hear back from all the voting members talking about how moved they were, that it
Right.
was a mental health album and that it was
Oh,
music therapy based. And so that to me was the real success.
that's wonderful. Good. I'm glad you just said that. That's really amazing. I'm glad too to hear it because you hear so much about, oh, you have to be this influencer. You've got, it's not, there's celebrity and then there's an influencer. And I'm like, I don't really, we do okay with social media. And I know that I'm part of the,
Mm-hmm.
oh, it's just okay part because I do not toot my own horn because I just don't like to. So
Mm-hmm.
I want to toot everybody else's horn, all the other podcasters on the network. You go, you be the one. Because I'm the same way. It's people don't understand that. Like I have one of our podcasters is a heavy metal rock god. And he is always like, I don't understand why you really don't care about celebrity, do you? And I'm as if I'm something that should be studied under glass, because he cannot understand why. And I'm like, I just don't care. Some people are not built to want that. You know, it's not that you don't, like you said, appreciate the recognition for what you do. That's absolutely lovely. But the thought of getting on a plane and having to go to an award show, oh my, the stress and the interruption in my life. You know, your life is so carefully put around your mental health. And then you have this big thing happen that you got to step out and then rearrange. You know what it's like. You know what I'm saying? You got to come home, and then you've got to sort of deprogram yourself from that event that you had to go to and the interruption in your life.
Yeah. Well, you know, the album was really about the yin yang. I mean, even the album cover, if you look at it, you've got the penguin and the polar bear standing on the moon, staring at the earth in a bubble, right? Yeah. So this is pre-COVID, the album comes out. And I'm just looking at how I've kind of lived out my album in this last year. It's been less than a year since it was released, and going from being out there in LA around like all of that, and now being completely sequestered back in Brooklyn, and just going from one extreme to the other. I mean, it's sort of it is a shock to the system. You know, it's one thing to stay at home and be in my studio out of choice, you know, but it's another from being required to go to the Grammys. I mean, I'm sure you can not go if you don't want to go, but you know, I still couldn't miss it. You know, it is a potentially once in a lifetime opportunity. But, you know, the way that I hold that whole idea of celebrity, because I work with a lot of kids, and some of them really do want to become famous. And I love having that conversation with them, because I do believe that there's a big difference between having something of value to share, and as a side effect, like the flexibility in yoga, you know, people are going to know who you are, because you're making something that they need access to. So I teach kids the concept of interdependence. You know, if you have a need to be seen and have approval, like, okay, you know, I do not have some of those needs as well. But for that to meet other people's needs, meaning you're making something that really is nourishing to them and beneficial, then that's interdependence as opposed to codependence. I hope that makes some kind of sense.
It totally did.
And
it
so,
totally makes sense.
Yeah. But I am hoping to spread the word more about the album itself. If I can do that and stay under the radar, great. You know, but I would love people to have more access to my music.
Yes, I say the same thing. I think we're in the same soul group. Jon, can you tell my listeners where they can find your music, find out more about you?
Sure. So my much needed to be updated website is cocreativemusic.com. You can find me on Instagram, Jon Samson. You can find me on Facebook, same name, and also have a fan page, Co-Creative Music, and Spotify and SoundCloud, and you know, I called my mother the other day, and she said, "Oh, you're interrupting me." I said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "I'm Googling you." So you can Google and you can find some stuff there, but definitely check out the YouTube channel. Look at the video for Predicament, and everyone's a narcissist but me.
Oh yeah, listen, my listeners especially they already did look that up while they're listening to this recording. So, and listeners, make sure you spell it correctly so you can find it easier. It's JONSAMSON. And Jon, Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been such a pleasure.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
And listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Mental Health News Radio.
Hi, listeners. I'll make it quick. These are some really cool places that give discounts and other cool things for listeners of Mental Health News Radio Network. If you want to get amazing help with healing from narcissistic abuse, go to healfromanarcissist.com. If you want CBD products that are the best of the best, I use them myself, go to proze.com and use the code mentalhealth20, mentalhealth20. If you want to get daily daily perk ups that help retrain your brain to think more positively, go to perkupdaily.com. And also, just because this one's fun, snarkycandles.com. I guarantee you'll love them. Snarky with a Y, SNARKY, candles.com. And don't forget, if you want to hear all the shows on the network about first responders, you can go to firstrespondermentalhealthnetwork.com, and all of our shows that focus on narcissistic abuse, narcissisticabusehealingnetwork.com. Thanks for listening, and back to the show.
Sometimes I'm passive aggressive, but never without good intentions. I heat up and act on my emotions.
Thanks so much for listening to Mental Health News Radio. Our podcast can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, and hundreds of other podcast apps, or you can visit our website at mentalhealthnewsradio.com. If you have a question or would like to be a guest, become a podcaster on our network, or join the amazing organizations that help keep us on the air, please email us at info@mhnrnetwork.com. Get ready for that special goodbye from our resident therapy dog, Miles, and a special thanks to Emily Sohn for letting us use her incredible song, Cordial, for our podcast music. Listen to the full song on SoundCloud at emily.sonne.
Don't be surprised when I don't hate on you. After all, we promised we'd be cordial. Sometimes in you I can fight it, but I oppose it.
Good boy.